Chapter 12. The Tainted Grove. The circle stood together, but the shadow was no longer chasing them. It was preparing to meet them head-on. The descent into the valley was anything but easy. With every step, the air grew heavier, thick with a strange metallic tang that settled at the back of their throats, like the taste of old blood. The forest, once alive with the hum of insects and the rustling of unseen creatures, had gone deathly silent. No birds stirred in the canopy, no small animals scurried through the underbrush. Even the trees stood rigid and lifeless, their twisted branches reaching skyward like skeletal fingers frozen in time. A sense of unease settled over the group. The deeper they went, the more the land itself seemed to shrink away from them, as if something unnatural had taken root beneath the soil, waiting. Dolo led the group with quiet confidence, his gaze sweeping the forest ahead. The air carried a tension he couldn't ignore, a restless whisper threading through the trees. He flexed his fingers, rolling his shoulders to ease the stiffness settling in from hours of travel. Fenra moved beside him, her silver fur barely visible against the shifting shadows. Her ears twitched at every distant sound, attuned to the land in a way no human ever could. Behind them, the rest of the wolves melted into the underbrush, moving like ripples across a still lake, silent, swift, and unseen. The others followed close behind. Pip skipped lightly over roots and fallen branches, whispering to Aros, who walked with his arms crossed tightly against his chest. "I'm telling you," Pip said, voice low but animated. "I totally felt something breathing back there." Aros rubbed his arms. "There probably was," he murmured. "The mana here feels wrong, like it's watching." Pip stopped mid-step. "Okay, yeah, that's creepy. You're not supposed to agree." "Sorry," Aros muttered. Behind them, Fenix moved with calculated grace, his daggers glinting faintly in the dim moonlight. His eyes, sharp and ever-moving, scanned the trees with a quiet, predatory focus. "Focus, Pip," he said, voice soft but commanding. "We're deep in shadow territory now." The group halted as the wolves reached the crest of a ridge. Below, a clearing stretched into a sunken hollow where jagged stone pillars jutted from the ground like broken ribs. Slick black vines tangled around the bases of the stones, pulsing with faint veins of crimson. The entire area radiated unease. Fenra's growl rumbled through the clearing. "This place smells of tainted decay." Arindra's sharp intake of breath cut through the silence. Her eyes were locked on the largest of the pillars. "That glyph," she whispered. "This is one of the ancient Leaf Dancer cities." "A city?" Dolo asked, brow furrowing. She stepped forward slowly. "Everythil," she said, voice reverent. "The forgotten city of whispers. My grandmother told me stories about it. It was one of the last elven strongholds during the cataclysm." She knelt beside a moss-covered pedestal and ran her fingers across the worn surface. "The vines are choking its memory." The wolves spread out along the clearing's edge, their hackles raised. Mako crouched beside a vine and touched it with the flat of his palm. The mana recoiled from his touch, sharp and cold. He jerked his hand away with a hiss. "The earth here's broken," he said, jaw tight. "The roots are suffocating." Waya drove the base of her staff into the ground and closed her eyes. Mana trickled into the soil. Her breath caught. Her eyes flew open. "Shadow alchemy," she said. "Ancient. This isn't new corruption. It's been festering for years." Aro stepped forward, his breathing uneven. His golden eyes flickered faintly as he stared beyond the ruins. "It's like the land's voice is muffled, and something's pushing back from underneath it." The wolves growled in unison. Fenra's fur bristled. "The core of this corruption lies below, and it stirs." Arindra knelt beside the pedestal. The runes spiraled along the stone, dulled with time. "It's a warning," she murmured. The shadows of ambition turned roots into rot. Do not forget, her voice faltered. And here, the whisper stone keeps the past. The betrayer watches. The betrayer? Mako asked. Awaken, Arindra said softly. He was once a guardian of the world tree, until he turned on us and poisoned the mana with shadow. The ground shuddered beneath them. The vines reacted immediately, tightening around the ruins. Thick tendrils snapped upward like striking serpents. Here we go, Pip yelped, twin daggers already flashing in her hands. Defensive formation, Dolo yelled. The wolves lunged toward the nearest vines. Fenra leapt on to the closest one, her jaws locking around its base. Shadow energy crackled along her fur as she twisted and tore the tendril from the ground. The others followed, snarling as they bit through the writhing growths. Dolo planted his spear and turned with the wind. It swirled around him, sharp and eager. He slashed horizontally, and the air condensed into a razor-thin wave that severed 3 vines in one motion. The severed lengths shriveled instantly, leaking black mist that evaporated into the night. Mako gritted his teeth and slammed his axe into the earth. Mana surged through his body. The ground trembled beneath his feet, then erupted into jagged stone spears. The spikes impaled the nearest vines, pinning them in place. But the tendrils didn't stop. They coiled around the stones, shattering them as they regrew. There's too many, Kalen shouted from behind Waya. Then let's even the odds. Pip's voice cracked with nervous excitement. She sprinted forward, her mana-enhanced agility propelling her faster than she'd ever moved. She ducked beneath one lashing vine, leaped over another, then drove her daggers into the thickest coil. Mana surged through her small frame. The daggers exploded with pale blue light. The vine shrieked and collapsed into ash. Pip froze, eyes wide. Whoa, I didn't know I could do that. Save the awe for later, Fenix barked, vaulting over a stone block and hurling a dagger into another tendril. The Whisperstone pedestal trembled. Aros staggered toward it. It's under the roots, the boy said, voice strained. The core of the corruption. Waya laid a hand on his back. I can help guide you. Reach into the mana and find it. Aros pressed both palms against the stone. Mana surged through his body. The ground responded with a low groan. The largest vine burst from the soil. It was thick as a tree trunk, veins of shadow energy crawling along its surface. It lashed toward Aros. Dolo vaulted toward the vine. The wind gathered beneath his feet, propelling him forward. He drove his spear into the vine's path, redirecting the strike. The tendril recoiled, writhing like a wounded snake. Mako raised his axe and slammed it into the earth once more. Cracks spiderwebbed toward the pedestal. Stone exploded upward, knocking the vine off balance. The pedestal split. A dark stone the size of a human heart rolled from the fractured base. Runic glyphs glowed faintly along its surface. Arindra lunged forward and snatched it up. The Whisper Stone. The vines convulsed violently, releasing a shrill, keening sound. The ground buckled beneath their feet. Black mist bled from the cracks. Fall back, Fenra howled. The group retreated toward the tree line. The vines withered as the Whisper Stone left the pedestal, collapsing into brittle ash. The mist dissipated with a final hiss. Arindra stood with the Whisper Stone cradled in her hands. The surface was cool against her palms, yet the mana inside vibrated like the distant beat of a war drum. Is it safe? Dolo asked, breathing hard. It holds memories, she said, echoes of what happened here. Then show us, Waya said. Arindra took a steadying breath and pushed mana into the stone. The air shimmered and grew cold. The ruined city vanished. The group stood in an ethereal courtyard bathed in moonlight. Elven towers soared overhead, untouched by time. Silver leaves drifted through the air like falling stars. The scene was pristine, beautiful, but charged with tension. A figure appeared at the courtyard's center. Tall, draped in shadow-black robes, his pale skin glowed faintly in the moonlight. His eyes burned crimson. Varokan. "The seal will not hold," the figure said, voice smooth and cold. "Mana will return, and with it, so shall we." The courtyard trembled, the fountains cracked, the trees withered to ash. The figure turned slowly. His gaze seemed to pierce the vision, locking on to Eros. The Avatar has risen once more, but this time he will not stand alone. The stone will guide us. The heart will open. And when it does, his lips curled into a smile. "I will be waiting." The vision shattered. Aro swayed on his feet. Dolo caught him just as his knees buckled. Waya clenched her staff. "He knows," she said softly. "Varokan knows about the Avatar." "And he's planning something," Mako added. His jaw worked as he stared at the ash-streaked ground. Fenra paced beside them. "The shadow is stirring across the land. My wolves and I must return to the crater and the village." Dolo's heart dropped. "You're leaving?" The wolf lowered her head. "We must protect the pack. The shadow moves on more than one front." The other wolves gathered beside her. One nuzzled Aros's hand before departing. Fenra paused beside Mako. "Stone wielder," she said softly. Mako didn't look at her. "Yeah?" "The shadow calls your name. Do not answer." Mako's expression didn't change. "I'm fine." Fenra tilted her head. "Mana is patient. The shadow is not. Stay close to the circle, or it will find you." The wolves slipped into the shadows, leaving the group alone in the haunted valley. Arindra ran her fingers over the Whisperstone's surface. "This will help us. If we can unlock its memories, we can see Varokan's next move." Dolo looked at the others. Aro stood close to him, exhausted but determined. Mako's expression was hard. Pip and Phoenix leaned against each other, ears drooping from exertion. "We know what Varokan wants," Dolo said. "The heart of Mana." "And now we know he's watching," Waya added. Aros's small voice broke the silence. "He said he'd be waiting." Dolo knelt beside the boy. "We will protect you." The wind stirred again, colder this time.